year is 67 AD. Somewhere beneath the streets of Rome, in a cell carved out of solid rock, an old man sits in the dark. There's no window, no warmth, just cold stone, damp air, and the faint sound of the city rumbling above him, a city that, just 3 years earlier, had burned to the ground. This is the Mamertine Prison, not a place for petty criminals. This is where Rome kept the people it feared most. And chained inside it is a man named Paul. To understand how he ended up here, you have to go back to a single night in July, 64 AD. Fire broke out near the Circus Maximus and tore through Rome for 6 days, devouring entire neighborhoods, leaving families homeless and a city in ashes. Whispers spread fast that the emperor himself, Nero, had started it, that he wanted the land for a new palace. Nero needed the whispers to stop. He needed someone else to blame. So he pointed at the Christians. It was the perfect target: small, misunderstood, easy to hate. Almost overnight, being a follower of Jesus became a death sentence in Rome. Believers were rounded up. Some were sewn into animal skins and torn apart by dogs in the arena. Others were nailed to crosses. Some were coated in tar and set on fire, used as human torches to light Nero's gardens after dark, while the emperor walked among the flames. Somewhere in that storm of fear, soldiers came for Paul. This wasn't his first arrest. Years before, he'd been held under a gentler kind of custody, a rented house, freedom to write, visitors coming and going, hope of release still alive. But this time was different. This time, there would be no rented house, no visitors coming freely, just a cold hole in the ground and the quiet certainty that he wasn't walking out of it. Picture him there, an old man now, his body worn down by decades of shipwrecks, beatings, stonings, hunger, and sleepless nights, all the things he once listed off himself when describing what it cost to carry this message. And yet, in that cell, he asked for one thing from his closest friend. "Bring me my cloak," he writes. "Winter is coming, and it's cold down here. And bring my scrolls, my parchments, not tools to plan an escape, not letters begging for rescue, just his coat and his books. Because even now, with death waiting outside the door, this man wants to keep reading, keep learning, keep filling whatever time is left with the God he'd given his entire life to." That letter, the last one he would ever write, addressed to a young man named Timothy, is the closest thing we have to sitting in that cell with him. And what's striking isn't fear, it's clarity. He writes that most of the people he once knew have scattered, too afraid of being associated with him to even show up. He stood trial essentially alone. No lawyer, no supporters in the crowd. And yet he says the Lord stood beside him and gave him strength, enough strength that the message could still be fully proclaimed, even from inside a cell built to make sure his voice would never be heard again. And then, near the very end of the letter, comes the line that would outlive every emperor who ever tried to silence him. "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith." Not written by a man begging for one more chance, written by a man closing the book on his own terms. There's something almost unbearable about the symmetry here, if you know where Paul came from. Decades earlier, before he was Paul, he was Saul, a man who hunted Christians for a living, who stood by holding coats while a mob stoned a young believer named Stephen to death, who dragged men and women from their homes to be imprisoned simply for following Jesus. And now here he is, in a cell, waiting for the very same fate he once handed out to others. Because he was a Roman citizen, the law spared him the cross. Early church history, recorded by figures like Eusebius, and referenced even earlier by writers such as Clement of Rome, who may have known people who witnessed it firsthand, holds that Paul was led outside the city walls, along the road called the Via Ostiensis, and beheaded. No dramatic final speech recorded. No last-minute rescue. Just a sword, a Roman road, and the quiet end of a life that had spent 30 years refusing to stop talking about Jesus, no matter what it cost him. Tradition says the Apostle Peter died around the same time, in this same city, under this same wave of persecution, crucified upside down, by his own request, because he didn't see himself worthy of dying the way his Lord had. Two men who had shaped the entire early church, both silenced within the same brutal stretch of years, under the same paranoid emperor. But here's the part Nero never counted on. By the time that sword fell, Paul had already planted churches across the empire in Ephesus, Philippi, Corinth, Thessalonica, Galatia, and beyond. He had trained the next generation to carry it forward, and he had written letters from prison cells, from house arrest, from exactly the kind of desperate circumstances meant to break a man that would go on to make up nearly half of the New Testament. Nero is gone now. His name survives mostly as a warning, a footnote in history books about cruelty and paranoia. But the letters written by a man he executed in a damp Roman prison are still read out loud in churches every single week, in almost every language spoken on earth. He wanted his last request answered a code against the cold, and his books to keep learning until the very end. What he actually left behind was far bigger than that. Rome ended his life. It never came close to ending his voice.